the silent half of humanity.
For most of human history, the world was built on a lie that said only one voice mattered. While men ruled kingdoms, wrote laws, and shaped history, women were erased from it, not because they were weak, not because they were incapable, but because they were silenced. Look at the earliest records of civilization. Stone tablets, ancient scrolls, royal decrees. Women appear rarely, and when they do, they are daughters, wives, or property. Their thoughts were not recorded. Their discoveries were not credited. Their stories were not preserved. History, as we know it, was written by those allowed to speak. But silence does not mean absence. Behind every empire, every invention, every surviving civilization, there were women, teaching children, preserving culture, healing the sick, passing knowledge in whispers. Their influence shaped humanity, even when their names were erased. In some early societies, women once held power. They were priestesses, healers, leaders. But as societies grew more complex, power centralized, and women were pushed out, strength became dominance, authority became masculine, and silence became law. From Mesopotamia to medieval Europe, from imperial China to colonial empires, the pattern repeated. Control the voice, and you control the future. Girls were denied education. Women were denied ownership. Their bodies were regulated. Their choices were punished, not by accident, but by design. The greatest mistake humanity ever made was not a war or a collapse of empires. It was silencing half of its own mind. Because when women are silenced, humanity loses balance. Creativity shrinks. Compassion fades. Progress slows. This documentary is not about blame. It is about truth, about the cost of silence, about what was stolen, and about what can still be reclaimed. Because history did not fail women. Humanity failed itself, and the echoes of that silence are still with us today.
When women held power.
Before silence, there was strength. Before exclusion, there was balance. Long before women were pushed into the shadows, they stood at the center of human civilization. Across ancient lands, women ruled, led, healed, and decided. They were queens and chiefs, not as exceptions, but as accepted authority. Power was not gendered, it was earned. In early societies, women governed with legitimacy. They commanded armies, negotiated peace, passed laws. Their rule was not chaos, it was order, and history once recognized it. Women also held spiritual authority. They were high priestesses, oracles, keepers of sacred knowledge. People traveled great distances to hear a woman's wisdom. The divine did not speak through men alone. Women were scientists. Before science had a name, they mapped the stars, recorded seasons, practiced medicine. Midwives saved lives. Healers preserved knowledge. They understood the body, the earth, and time. Across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and Europe, women led in different forms. Warrior queens, diplomats, judges, traders. Societies thrived when leadership was shared. Children learned from women elders. Markets flourished under women's control. Communities were guided by experience, not dominance. Balance created stability, but power attracts fear. As wealth grew and empires expanded, control became centralized, and those who controlled it decided who could lead. The shift was slow but deliberate. Councils became male-only. Sacred texts were reinterpreted. Women's names were erased from records. Leadership was redefined as masculine. Women did not lose power because they failed. They lost it because they were feared. By the time history was rewritten, women were no longer rulers. They were subjects. And the age of silence began. Pause. Soft music rise. Because the question is not whether women could lead. History already answered that. The question is why the world chose to forget.
Laws that erased women.
As societies grew more powerful, they began to write rules, and those rules decided who mattered. Law was meant to create order, but for women, it became a cage. Across civilizations, laws slowly stripped women of identity, autonomy, and voice, not overnight, but line by line. In ancient legal codes, women were not citizens. They were property, first of their fathers, then of their husbands, then of their sons. A woman's life was legally owned by someone else. In many societies, women could not own land, inherit wealth, sign contracts, testify in court, choose their own future. Their existence was recognized, but their independence was erased. Marriage was not partnership. It was transfer of ownership. A woman's value was measured by obedience, fertility, and silence. To disobey the law was to invite punishment. Education laws excluded women. Knowledge was dangerous because knowledge leads to power. So girls were locked out of schools. Books were forbidden. Curiosity was punished. Ignorance was enforced. Religion and law fused together. Sacred authority was used to justify inequality. Male interpretations became law. Female voices were labeled sinful. Silence was no longer cultural. It was legal. Across continents, the pattern repeated. Different languages, different religions, same outcome. Law erased women from public life. And when injustice becomes law, oppression no longer needs force. It becomes normal. The greatest tragedy was not that women broke these laws. It was that the world believed they deserved them.
Education forbidden.
Knowledge is power. So for centuries, women were kept away from it. Not by accident, by design. Girls were told their minds were dangerous, too curious, too independent, too much. Books became forbidden objects. Classrooms became locked doors. Across empires and religions, laws and customs agreed on one thing. A woman who reads is a woman who questions, and questions threaten control. Girls watched brothers go to school, while they were taught silence, to obey, to serve, to forget curiosity. In many societies, teaching a woman to read was considered rebellion, punishable, sometimes by death. Libraries were built, but not for her. Universities rose, without her name carved anywhere. Knowledge was hoarded, and ignorance was enforced. Even when women learned in secret, their brilliance was stolen, their discoveries published under male names, their ideas dismissed as accidents. History absorbed their genius. Without credit, the greatest theft was not education, it was potential. Millions of minds, never allowed to exist. And yet, in darkness, some girls still read. By candlelight, in whispers, a great risk, because knowledge once tasted cannot be unlearned. This was not the absence of intelligence. It was the fear of it.
Witch hunts, punishing knowledge.
When women were denied education, some still learned, and for that, they were punished. They were not witches. They were midwives, healers, widows, wise women, women who knew herbs, who understood birth, who spoke without permission. Knowledge made them dangerous. In a world ruled by fear, anything unexplained became evil. A healed illness, a healthy birth, a woman who lived alone. Suspicion spread faster than truth. Churches and courts joined hands. Religion was twisted into law. Law was twisted into terror. And terror became tradition. Women were accused without proof, tried without defense, condemned without mercy. Confessions were forced. Silence was treated as guilt. Tens of thousands were tortured, burned alive, drowned, hanged, not for crimes, but for knowledge. Midwives were targeted first. They understood the female body. They assisted births without male control. So they were labeled servants of darkness. Books were destroyed, herbal knowledge erased, generations of wisdom lost to fire. The greatest crime was knowing too much. Men feared what they could not control, so they destroyed it. The witch hunts were not madness. They were strategy, a warning. Learn too much, and you burn. Speak too freely, and you disappear. By the time the fires died out, women had learned the lesson. Silence is survival. This was not justice. This was fear punishing intelligence.
Silence, passed down generations.
The fires eventually went out. The courts moved on. The accusations faded. But the fear remained. Survival required silence. Women learned what history demanded of them. Do not stand out. Do not speak too loudly. Do not know too much. Mothers did not teach daughters courage. They taught caution, not because they were weak, but because they remembered. Every warning became a lesson. Every lesson became tradition. Silence was passed down, like an inheritance. Stories were left untold. Knowledge was hidden. Questions were swallowed before they were spoken. Women learned to shrink themselves, to make others comfortable, to stay invisible, because visibility once meant danger. Fear didn't need laws anymore. It lived inside homes, inside habits, inside expectations. Even when the world changed, memory did not. The past whispered through generations. Be careful. Don't provoke. Stay safe. The cost was enormous. Ideas never shared. Voices never heard. Lives lived quietly. This is how oppression survives. Not through force, but through fear remembered. Silence became culture. Culture became identity. And identity shaped destiny. But silence has limits. And memory does not erase truth. Because buried voices still echo. And one day, they demand to be heard.
Breaking the silence.
Silence can survive for generations, but it is never permanent. At some point, someone speaks. Not loudly, not safely, but truthfully. It begins in whispers. A woman writes what she was told to forget. Another asks a question she was warned not to ask. Another refuses to lower her eyes. Small acts, dangerous acts. History rarely changes with explosions. It changes with courage repeated. Women began to reclaim words. Education, once forbidden, was pursued in secret, then demanded openly. Schools opened. Books returned to hands that were denied them. Voices rose where there had been only silence. In homes, in classrooms, in streets. Each voice breaking a rule written long ago. Some were punished, mocked, silenced again, erased, but each attempt failed to restore the old quiet, because silence depends on fear, and fear weakens when it is named. Women began telling their stories, of injustice, of stolen knowledge, of generations taught to disappear, and for the first time, they were heard. What was once called rebellion became resistance. What was once dangerous became necessary. The world did not change overnight, but it shifted, slowly, unevenly, irreversibly. Breaking silence is not easy. Costs friendships, safety, sometimes lives. But silence costs more. Costs truth, costs history, costs the future. And so women kept speaking, not because it was safe, but because it was survival. The silence did not vanish, but it cracked, and through that crack, a new world began to breathe.
The fight back begins.
Silence was broken, and once broken, could not be restored. What began as whispers became voices. What became voices became movements. Women did not ask for permission anymore. They organized. They educated themselves. They challenged laws written without them. History records moments when the oppressed stop surviving and start resisting. This was one of them. Women demanded education, and when denied, they built schools themselves. They taught in homes, in basements, in secret classrooms. Knowledge returned where it had been erased. They demanded the right to speak. When ignored, they wrote books, articles, manifestos. Words became weapons. They demanded political power. Votes once denied were taken through struggle. Marches filled streets. Prisons filled with protesters. History filled with names once forgotten. The cost was high. Beatings, imprisonment, ridicule. Some paid with their lives. But fear had changed sides. Those who once ruled through silence now feared voices they could not control. Each victory inspired another. Education expanded. Rights increased. Laws shifted. Slowly, unevenly, but forward. Women entered universities, courts, governments, not as guests, as equals. Yet the fight was never finished. Progress sparked backlash. Rights gained were challenged again. Old fears resurfaced in new forms. The lesson of history is clear. Rights are never given permanently. They must be defended by every generation. The fight back did not end. It evolved from survival to resistance to leadership. And today the voices once burned now echo across the world. Still rising, still fighting, still unfinished.
Why this still matters today.
The fight did not end in history books. Continues today everywhere. Silence may have been broken, but inequality remains. Voices are still silenced. Opportunities still denied. Knowledge still hoarded. The lessons of the past are not ancient. They are warnings. That fear can still control. That power can still exclude. That history can still repeat itself. Every generation inherits both silence and courage. What we choose to do with it defines the future. Women today still face laws, cultures, and traditions that try to keep them small, but they also inherit a legacy of resistance, a legacy of speaking when it is dangerous, a legacy of fighting when it is hard. Education, equality, and freedom were fought for. They were not given. They must be defended always. The silence of the past reminds us how precious voice is. The oppression of the past reminds us how fragile rights are. The courage of the past reminds us how unstoppable humanity can be. This is why history matters. Because if we forget, we are doomed to repeat. So speak, learn, teach, resist. Because the fight is not over. It never will be. The voices that were once buried in fear now echo across the world, and they demand justice, equality, and remembrance. History is written in blood, but the future can be written in courage.